Now, some of the victims of the devastating storm that ravaged parts of Limpopo are yet to receive relief from the government. The destructive hailstorm has ripped through some parts of the province, leaving a trail of destruction. Disaster management says 4 lives were lost. Areas that are severely affected include Vhembe, Mopani, Capricorn and Sekhukhune district municipalities. More than 2,000 households from 244 villages across the 4 districts have been affected. Electricity infrastructure damage has left the communities without power. Residents are now relying on firewood as their primary source of energy. Meanwhile, the Human Settlement Department says it's overwhelmed with the scale of devastation. It wants the province to be declared a disaster area. Let's expand this discussion with Dr. Takie Makananisa, Head of Provincial Disaster Centre in Limpopo for more. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, storms accompanied by large amounts of hail wreaking havoc across Limpopo. What's your assessment in terms of impact?
Good evening, Mpho. Basically, we are overwhelmed as a province. This is substantial. As you've indicated earlier on, we've got more than 2,000 households that have been affected. We've got a total of 244 villages that have been affected. And in fact, yes, to a very large extent, we are doing the very best we can as a province to ensure that our communities that have been affected are really taken care of.
The very best you can as a province, what does that entail?
That entails right from the beginning to ensure that the available departments that are the leading agencies, for instance, in this instance, we've got schools that have been damaged, which is 71 schools. We've got about 7 clinics, and we've got, as you indicated, electricity connections. So these are the leading agency departments that are now working around the clock to ensure that the services are restored. And if you talk about education, what is it that they are doing? They actually, because it's exam time.
Yeah, matriculants are writing final exams.
That concerns us, that concerns parents, that concerns the government of Limpopo. What we are doing is to ensure that the education department secure venues that are conducive, alternative venues conducive for learners to continue with their exams uninterrupted. And same thing with Eskom, that is currently restoring the power, and Human Settlement, they are also finalizing the beneficiary lists, so much so that they roll out their processes to ensure that the damaged homes are restored, or maybe they could be allocated disaster emergency housing.
Yeah.
But all the same, you should know that disaster is everybody's business. So we include NGOs, a gift of the givers. We also include Red Cross, and in fact we also call upon the local businesses to assist where possible, because there is never enough resources to actually handle this instance. But I should indicate we implement policies of government under a very stressed situation like this one. What we call for is to ensure that we gather all the data regarding the total damage, and after which then we present this at the National Disaster Management Centre, so much so that we are able to secure classification of this incident as a disaster, after which then the Premier can proceed to declare a state of provincial disaster.
And how long will that process take to unfold? And with that declaration, what does it mean for the residents?
A disaster, normally it's large scale, and therefore the duration at which that should be accomplished, I mean, it depends on the effort that is put around. If we have all hands on deck, we are very sure that within a short space of time, these things can be sorted out. But I need to indicate that we have now secured a second Provincial Disaster Consultative Committee meeting at which we are going to present the final report for all the damages. And in that consultative forum, it is an MEC's forum where the executive mayors sit, where the municipal managers sit, where the heads of centers sit, for which we authenticate the report, out of which then we process it and send it to NDMC so that they can take it from there. But in terms of the turnaround time, really, it should be within a very short space of time. One could not really determine. But there are factors to be considered for them to even classify, meaning that they can go to an extent of even having to launch their own assessment on top of the assessment, just so that government's money is well spent, good value for money.
We know that 4 lives were lost during this unfortunate time. How much assistance is being given to the families, and what details has come to the surface around who these individuals are?
Oh, basically what happened is that the under Capricorn district, there's one person that lost a life, and under Sekhukhune district, there's 3 people that lost their lives. Under Sekhukhune, it's 1 adult and 2 children. So the policies of government are pro-poor, and in this instance, the Department of Social Development is underway to assess the situation and see how best they can assist those families. But I should indicate that even our district executive mayors, the Sekhukhune district executive mayor has been involved into ensuring that these families are actually, their situation is addressed.
In terms of forecasting and pre-planning and putting in some sort of intervention plan ahead of such a disaster, I mean, what are you working on as a department to ensure that we are not seeing the scale of such devastation without a plan in action?
Well, fortunately, disaster is a highly specialized area, and we do not thumbsuck. We don't work haphazardly. Following the Sendai framework, what we do is there are 3 dimensions which we plan around. That is the exposure part, and the vulnerability part, and the capacity part. In the exposure part, that's when we, based on the weather forecasts and the exposed communities, that we ensure that those early warning are communicated effectively to such exposed communities in order that
and pardon the interruption, was that message sent out to the community? Was it received in a manner which would prepare them for such a disaster?
Let me say successfully so, because South African Weather Service issued a level 2 impact-based warning on the 27th, and then out of which then as a province we issued a directive to all the district HOCs, which are the head of centers, to convene what we call the joint operation centers. This is where all the stakeholders sit around and plan together, and all the communication as well strategies are outlined there in order that they reach the most vulnerable communities. So as I was indicating, in terms of the extent of vulnerability, to an extent that we understand that there are land management policies of government and bylaws. These are the structures which we make use of, the systems that we make use of to ensure that we do not, we avoid, to see communities building in low-lying areas. Because that is where the problem is. When it starts to rain like this, we know that we would have to respond in such places. And the last one, which is the capacity, by the way, in those 3 dimensions for the Sendai framework, is that we need to present, awareness campaigns and workshops, particularly to those vulnerable communities, in order that they are
what response, I mean, I would assume that you have done this already instead of talking about how you could have done it. What has the response been from the community in terms of reception to those ideas? Because, there's been a lot of devastation. There's a lot of psychological impact. People now wondering how they're going to rebuild their lives.
Yeah, response basically when it comes to giving them capacity is that is where we see, more and more communities not, avoiding to reside in such areas which we have, as disaster management demarcated it as very risky areas. So I think to a very large extent it is paying dividend, but it's the qualitative aspects, fluid aspects, which you cannot really quantify. So, but yeah, given the extent to which we have collaborations with the traditional councils who are actually the custodians of land, according to some of the legislations of government. So we are pretty sure that this information is going to the right people and making an impact to that extent. But it is truly what we need to indicate that maybe we need to encourage our traditional leaders as well not to look, to give residential sites at low-lying areas, because come this time around, we know that we will be running around as well.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Let's perhaps leave it there for now. Speaking there to Dr. Takie Makananisa, who's head of Provincial Disaster Centre in Limpopo, giving us a sense of the impact of the devastating floods.